Some of you may know the Jewish catalog. That's one of the first ways that there was really a very big push to put Judaism into people's hands at home and not to keep it in an ivory tower, not to keep access for only those who could access the language or the text or some kind of traditional knowledge of ritual and how you do that. Rabbi Michael Strassfeld was one of the first to say, how do we make Judaism accessible to everybody, to the Jew in the pew, to people who are curious and maybe aren't even Jewish yet? And so the Jewish catalog came out in the 70s and really made that possible and really made that happen for so many people who remain so grateful for that first, access that they really felt they had to doing Judaism at home or having access even to Judaism in the shul, in the synagogue. He's published a lot, and you should look him up. And but his book on living Jewishly is really an incredible work. And I went to find my copy to hold it up and show y'all, but I realized yet a third copy of his book is gone. I couldn't find it because I'd given it to somebody who was exploring Judaism. I said, you have to read this. So A Book of Life by Rabbi Michael Strassfeld is a beautiful, beautiful book about living Jewishly every day and how to do that. So also he is a library, which I don't quite understand because I can't ever remember melodies if they don't have words. I can't remember them at all. And he's just a library of Hasidic nigunim. He grew up marinating in that stuff. And so he has a Hasidic nigun for any occasion, anytime, anything. So he's going to be sharing, I hope, one with us. If not, I can tell you one that I like that you do. And he has a CD of nigunim. If you are somebody who likes to chant and likes the Hasidic flavor of moving into Jewish chant and how that moves us and opens us, he's got a great CD on that too. So without further ado, Rabbi Michael Strassfeld, take us, send a text.
Thank you. Amy, I'll take requests later if you want.
All right. So let's say a bracha. We usually say a bracha before we study together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, God, Spirit of the universe, who makes us holy with your mitzvot and calls us to engage with our sacred literature, the words of Torah.
Amen. So, hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Amy. Your praise, it's embarrassing, but I feel, it's great to have this opportunity to, as you said, to spend some time together. And I'm sure actually all the people on this call feel lucky to have your presence with them all the time, in good times and bad times, and being on lockdown or being out in the countryside. I only wish I lived in California. So I thought we could begin, and even though each of the sessions stands on its own, there will be some themes that continue, but I thought it'd be useful to begin before we jump into the next text is if people had, thinking about last time's text, if there were things that struck you after we were together that you would like to share with the group, or perhaps there's a question that you didn't get a chance to ask.
Kind of with Klein, but she already raised her hand. She emailed me and I said, that you might want to ask Rabbi Strassfeld that question.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's get some questions. And then, but I'd also like to hear, a couple people, just what's the thing that struck them the most from last time's teaching? What's perhaps the thing they're going to want to carry with them, put it in their wallet of texts and values and teachings that they want to carry with them through their life, or at least for a while. So both questions or comments like that. So wait.
Susan, why don't you start, Susan?
Yes. Well, I have a question about the interpretation of last week's section that we studied. And that is, how do the Orthodox interpret this Talmud section that we covered? It seems to be that it was very difficult for them to interpret it the way we chose to. You may have to give some history so we bring everybody's mind up.
Yeah, well, the text on the surface, is about three people who are not Jewish who come first to the sage Shammai, and then when they get rejected by him, they go to the sage Hillel, who has, completely accepts them, and I think the problem that some traditional Orthodox or traditional might have with the story is that Hillel's response to these people who are coming, who we talked about, they have conditions to engaging in this process of conversion. So just to mention one says, teach me the whole Torah while I'm standing on one foot. Right. So, Shammai basically says, get out of here. And, Hillel gives, some of you may remember, like the Reader's Digest condensed version of the rabbinic tradition. One sentence, and rest is commentary, go study. But one of the amazing things he does is he immediately converts the people. And there was a question last time about, well, wait a second, I thought there was some ambivalence about conversion, or there's a tradition that someone comes and expresses an interest in converting and you're supposed to send them away 2 times or something, a certain amount of times, and as a kind of to test their sincerity. And here, Hillel, immediately converts them, and I think it's a variant tradition. That is, I think the Talmud and rabbinic texts have these attitudes of welcoming to people who are interested in Judaism, and also a tradition of suspicion, of unwelcome, and even of suspicion of the motives of why would someone want to convert and join this persecuted people. That's one way, I think, over centuries. But the thing is that the Talmud is this vast, and rabbinic Judaism is this vast corpus, and ultimately the practice, even if it may not be exactly halakha Jewish law, the practice is not to. If you go to an Orthodox rabbi today, I don't know if they would send you away. Maybe some would. I don't know, but I think they would say, "Look, you have to study. You have to take a course of study. You have to learn about Judaism, not just be interested in Judaism. And if you do this course of study and you're interested, and the rabbi is supposed to work with you, then great. At the end of that, there'll be a conversion. And and each rabbi can have somewhat different criteria. And in fact, I would say, though that wasn't in the text at all, is and partly that has to do with contemporary life, right? So an Orthodox rabbi won't accept the conversion done by a non-Orthodox rabbi. And as I've worked with many people converting over the years, and I tell them when they come, I say, look, you have to understand there are consequences to the choice you're making to work with me as a non-Orthodox rabbi. And I say, like, there's two factors that lead to that. The fact is, I would encourage people to take a course of study. So the Orthodox rabbi might have had a different course of study, but fundamentally, the people had to go study. I didn't go and just convert them, after the first meeting. But one difference was political. That is, I'm not an Orthodox rabbi. And for, I think, just about any Orthodox rabbi, what non-Orthodox rabbis do is not considered legitimate. It's like, whatever. I never got my BA, so I can't say I'm a college. I just made that up. I'm just not a college graduate. So without the piece of paper, without the right rabbinic ordination, you're just not. You're not really a rabbi. So I would say that's kind of a political difference. And the other is actually there's a more substantial difference. Many Orthodox rabbis would say, well, if you're going to convert, it's not just your desire to join the Jewish people, but you have to commit to observing the mitzvot. You have to commit to doing Jewish observance. And if the person who is thinking of converting says, I have a lot of Jewish friends, and they don't do, they're eating cheeseburgers and lobster, and they never go to synagogue. So, why is it different? So the Orthodox rabbi, we say, well, that's the truth. That's the reality today. But if I, as Orthodox rabbi, am going to convert someone, I want them to express this commitment. I may not ask you to check off all 613 commandments, but I may say, I want you to have some Shabbat practice, but I'm not, you don't have to check off all the boxes. And that depends on the Orthodox rabbi. Some would be more demanding, some less. That's a real difference. My own policy was to say, I think there's lots of ways to be Jewish, and I accept them. I guess if someone said, I have no interest in Judaism, I don't believe in anything, I would say, I don't understand what's going on here. But I don't think you have to get 3 out of 5 on my list or 1 out of 5. I think there's many ways to be Jewish. And I also think that people are on a journey, and the way they're going to be Jewish now and the way they're going to be Jewish 10 years from now or 20 years from now is not the same. And it doesn't mean that I think, oh, well, once you convert, you'll become more and more Jewish. No, not necessarily. I think people's lives change, their circumstances, et cetera. And in that sense, I think it's a little bit closer to Hillel's point of view, which is let's be welcoming. And I do think the bottom line for Hillel is like, you never know how things are going to work out. So let's imagine the best about people, not be suspicious. So I think that was not a long extra answer. I think the Orthodox rabbi say, yeah, that's just not our practice. Like what Hillel did isn't our practice, and that would be the answer. The larger ways of reading the text that we did, that it's about not just about conversion, it's about dealing with anything unexpected. How do you respond to challenges, to new things? I think an Orthodox rabbi could read that the same way, though they may say, and actually we'll touch on this in today's text. There's limits. Sometimes the halakha gives you the answer to the question. The answer could be no, or it could be yes, but there are certain things that are just not allowed. So this isn't a question of like how do you respond to a challenging thing. It's because sometimes the halacha gives you the response, and I think for some people that's part of the appeal of orthodoxy is this a sense of there's structure and answers to many things. So let me stop. I think.
So Dana had her hand up and then it went down. So Dana, did you want to still ask your question? And then Bert's going to talk. So, and then we're going to go on to the text for today.
Yeah, great.
Bert,
all right, Bert.
Say something and then we'll go on to the text.
Traditionally, wasn't circumcision required for males who got converted?
Right. So that's a great point, Bert, because I think what an Orthodox rabbi would say about the Hillel story is, oh, when he said he converted them right away, he took them to the mikveh and circumcised them if it was a male.
Of course.
Right? The text just doesn't say that, right?
Well, of course, duh. The Aramaic for duh is pshita. Like, obviously, like it would have meant mikveh and mila and conversion. And circumcision.
Yeah, and that could be correct. In other words, I don't think that's only an Orthodox reading of the text to avoid the problem. It just wasn't important for the story. Well, the important point in the story was he did it immediately. So the non-studying would still be a challenge for the Orthodox rabbi, because that is the practice and has been, as far as I know, for a very long time, and it's based on rabbinic sources. And it's there's a source that says when someone comes to asking to convert, you should teach them some of the important mitzvot commandments and some of the minor mitzvot, and that's not spelled out, and that would suggest is that you don't have to know everything. Right, because it's saying like you should give them some of it, some important stuff, some of the other stuff, so they have some real sense of what Judaism is about. Not that you have to, pass the test and you have to get over, 90, otherwise you failed. You can't be. It's not like passing the bar. But that's I think it's I'm glad you raised that, Bert, because. I think that's how they would read the text. Brenda, is your hand up?
It is.
Okay.
I have experience with this 35 years ago. My husband and I went to shul, and the Orthodox rabbi said, "You'll never be Jewish. There is no conversion. Goodbye." And so we went to University of Judaism, and Rabbi Neil had just started there, and we took the whole course, and then being from England, he was not circumcised, and we found out that it's a covenant. So for the men that were circumcised, they got a ceremonial prick, but he had to be circumcised. And all the other people had all this questioning and all, and he said the only question they asked was how painful was it? They figured he was committed. So.
Right.
Who has the text? Rebecca, do you have the text, or is it?
I have the text, so I'm going to share a screen. The text is, as you'll see right from the first line, and don't try and read ahead while I'm talking. It's like driving and texting at the same time. So there's this group called the Men of the Great Assembly. And needless to say, or maybe it should be said, that they are all men. That there was this was an institution, the Anshe Knesset Hagadolah, the Men of the Great Assembly, that according to the rabbinic tradition existed in Second Temple times. So just a really brief history, right? So there's the first temple, the Temple of Solomon. It gets destroyed by the Babylonians. There's the Babylonian exile. And then some of the Jews return to Israel, the land of Israel, build the second temple. So we're talking about 516 or so BC, BCE, and this period becomes known as the Second Temple period by Jewish historians, and it continues from then until the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70 AD. So it's about 586 years or so that the Second Temple period exists, and so in the rabbis, the rabbinic tradition, which comes, so the beginning of the rabbis, Hillel and Shammai, come towards the end of the Second Temple period, right? So that's when we begin to see evidence of rabbis, of synagogues, of emerging rabbinic tradition, but they, as we'll see in this text, in the rabbis' imagination, they're not creating something that never existed before. They imagine that Abraham was, wearing tefillin and doing also other Jewish rituals. And in fact, that a number of the biblical characters studied in yeshivot, even though there wasn't anybody around except them, so what yeshiva were they going to? Studied, in rabbinic texts, well, not rabbinic text, was studying something, studying Torah. And part of this imagination is that there was a group of people like the rabbis and like the Sanhedrin, which, was actually probably did exist in some period in Jewish history of like the Supreme Court, but with 70 sages, who was the final decider, just as the Supreme Court in the United States, right? So before the Sanhedrin, there was this group called the Men of the Great Assembly. Scholars not coming from the Orthodox world say there's no evidence that this group actually existed. We just don't know. There's no outside evidence, no documents that would support its existence. It doesn't prove it didn't exist. It just we have no evidence that it did exist. We don't have that much evidence from the Second Temple period in general. So what the Talmud tells us about this group is that they made decisions about the liturgy, which we begin to see as I said, in the Second Temple period. The liturgy, as we know it from the prayer book, begins to emerge in this time. We don't know that in biblical times, First Temple times, there were people were praying. Obviously, the Psalms go back earlier, but we don't know, and we don't know what was being done in the temple in Jerusalem. Was the sacrifices accompanied by prayers, by psalms, by the Levites singing? Could be, but we just don't know. So one of the things they do is begin the liturgy, which is a very liberal scholars will say that the rabbinic tradition creates the liturgy, both the prayers that are not biblical prayers, like the Amidah, as well as the concept of praying 3 times a day, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's the introduction, just to know who these people are. So I'll begin. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, so he's a Talmudic scholar, said, why were they known as the men of the great assembly? That is, why are they called great? That's what the question is really. Why is it the great assembly? Why are they called that? And he gives the answer. Because they restored the crown of praise to God. What does that mean? We'll find out. Moses came and said, Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanorah. It's a biblical quotation from Deuteronomy 10:17. Moses praises God and says, God, the great, the mighty, and the awesome. Gadol, great. Gibor, which can be, Gibor can be, courage, but it also means mighty, powerful. And Norah, awesome, like Yamim Noraim, the high holy days, the awesome days, right? If we were sitting in a classroom, I would say, okay, where do you know this phrase from? You get extra points for being the first to acknowledge it, but I won't do it on Zoom, it takes too long. So that phrase is in the Amidah, the prayer that's central to every service, right near the beginning. Right. Etc., etc. So, when the rabbis went to create the Amidah prayer, which, again, liberal scholars think was created by the rabbis, they took this line from Deuteronomy and said, "Oh, this is great," and if Moses said it, that's good. So let's quote Moses. A lot of the Amidah is written by the rabbis themselves, but sometimes they use biblical quotations in whole or in part, and so they use this to describe God. So God is great, mighty, and awesome, and that's what we say traditionally 3 times a day in the Amidah. But later, the prophet Jeremiah came and said, and Jeremiah was a prophet who prophesied the destruction of the first temple, and he lived through the destruction of the first temple. So he both foretold it and was there when it was destroyed and in the aftermath. So later the prophet Jeremiah came and said, Gentiles are destroying or plundering God's temple. Where is God's Norah? Where is God's awesomeness? Therefore, Jeremiah, when praising God, omitted the attribute of awesome. So if we look at Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 17, it says, Osa chesed l'alafim, God does chesed, kindness to thousands, ha'el, hagadol, hagibor. So the exact same phrase, except it's missing one of the attributes. It's missing Norah, ha'el, hagadol, v'hagibor. So it's a wonderful example of how the rabbis use the Bible, use the Torah verses to construct something that they are either strikes them or they want to talk about, and it's it's very hard to tell when they're doing what we might call midrash, these fanciful interpretations, whether the verse is driving it or they're thinking about some issue and they say, look, here, this verse supports it. And we'll see here, they have great textual support. In other words, Jeremiah's verse sounds just like what Moses is saying, except it's missing one word. So why didn't Jeremiah have the same thing as Moses, right? Jeremiah knew what Moses said, supposedly, whatever. So it's kind of a good question. Like, how come he left it out? Well, now we have a story to tell you why he left it out. Because he experienced the destruction of the temple. And he said, what's awesome? Why is God Norah? the temple's destroyed. Our enemies, ransacked the temple. We were living in exile, et cetera, et cetera. I don't see God's awesomeness. And so Jeremiah took out Norah. Daniel comes later historically than Jeremiah. He comes and says, Gentiles are enslaving God's son. Where is God's mightiness? Daniel's in the time of the exile, the Babylonian exile. So, we're in exile, and either spiritually or maybe literally, the Jewish people are enslaved, or they're certainly subordinate. They don't have their own country. They don't have their own king. So where's God's Gibor? Where's God's mightiness? And again, there's a verse in Daniel where Daniel says, I pray and confess to Ha'el, Hagadol, v'Hanara. Again, the same three words, but he has Norah, but he doesn't have Gibor. So each of them takes out one and leaves two. And you could ask, well, why did they take out only one? Why didn't they take out Gadol and Gibor? Nobody asked that question except we do. But also the verse supports one, which makes it striking, right? If they took out two, you could say, well, he just wanted to have a shorter service, so he said one thing instead of it saved all that time, So so that's the structure, right? So what you have here is Jeremiah and Daniel are responding to the actual circumstances of their lives. And they look around and they say, I can't pray this. I just, that's not my experience. And so then now we're going to come back. Wait, what was the question that was being asked here? Why are they called the men of the great assembly? Why are they called great? So that's the next paragraph. They, the men of the great assembly, came and said, on the contrary, this is the definition of mighty, of Gibor, that God suppresses God's anger and is long-suffering toward the wrongdoers. And this is God's awesomeness, Norah. For if not for the Holy One's awesomeness, awesomeness has somewhat different connotation these days, awesome. Awesomeness, how could one nation, Israel, survive amidst all the other oppressing nations? So basically, what they do is they redefine what those words mean, right? They redefine what does it mean to be mighty? It doesn't mean that you defeat your enemies. It means that you suppress your anger and you have patience, right? You don't act immediately, you wait things out. So that's a kind of mightiness. There's expression Ezu Gibor, who's mighty, Kovesh et Yitzro, who can conquer his impulses, right? So someone who has control of himself, who doesn't just, blurt out things that later they really feel badly that they said them, or someone who physically responds to somebody else, without thinking, right? So there is a sense that it takes a certain amount of strength to respond wisely rather than instinctually or emotionally. That there's something, awesome about, the fact that, this is like, people, some Jews like to say, there's something special about the Jewish people. How else could they survive? And look at all those nations what happened to the Etruscans. Nobody knows any Etruscans anymore. They're all disappeared. Like the story of the Jewish people is a miracle, right? Some people like to say that, like to believe that. And this is a version of that, right? So that it's saying it's God that has made this happen. Like, it's miraculous that the Jewish people have survived all these years, all these persecutions, all these simulations, and it's because of God. That is God's no ra. That's what's awesome about God and the Jewish people. And in some ways, what they're and partly addressing is the circumstances that they're living in. I guess there were Jews living in the land of Israel in the Second Temple, but certainly after the destruction, the Second Temple is destroyed, we live in exile, right? And in a certain way, this was a chat when we talked at the beginning, was sort of like, how would Orthodox have understood that text? So for traditional Jews, for Jews who believe that they're God's chosen people, how do you explain the fact that we were defeated and the temple was destroyed and we have gone into exile? So one answer, of course, is, well, we sinned. We did things wrong. First temple, we worshipped idols, whatever it was, and so it's God's punishment. And someday we will return. But it became an increasing challenge as time went on, and centuries passed, and we still didn't get to go back. And if you think that God acts in history, then it becomes a real challenge of, well, why are the other religions triumphant? And we, our temple was destroyed and we're exiles and we're a small minority. And here, look at Christianity, and here, look at Islam, and Christianity specifically said, we have superseded the Old Testament and the Jews. And part of the proof of that is we have all these countries that are Christians, and we have Christian rulers, and we have the Pope, and you guys don't have anything. And it was, a kind of argument that I think for us today seems like, like we don't think of the world like that, but it's somewhat not so different than people who say, I'm on the winning team in Super Bowl, and God was on our side, and we want to thank God, for winning. It's like it's that belief, somewhat, whatever, that God's on your side, and therefore you should win. And so this, in part, is an answer to, despite the fact it looks like we lost, we haven't really lost. And it's not only God who has to be long-suffering and be patient. It's like we, the Jewish people, have to be patient as well. So I think that's one piece of what's going on here, of trying to explain, like, how could it be that we look like the losers in history and abandoned by God, or punished by God, certainly. And this is a way to understand that. And that's like the third paragraph there. Which isn't the text, it's just the explanation. They thus restored the crown to God by including mighty and awesome in the prayers, praising God. Hence, they were known as the men of the great assembly. They did a great thing by putting that back, right? And it also reflected the practice of the Jews saying the Amidah, that they were saying that. They were saying those three things together. So that would be the text if we stopped there and didn't read the end. But let me just pause for a moment because I want to read the end, and then after reading the end, I'll open it up for people's comments. But if there's any, questions, particularly, I didn't understand something or confusion. Let me just.
So Bert's got his hand up, of course, but I'm going to jump over Bert because I'm the senior rabbi.
Okay.
And I'm just going to say, I think this is a common. What I love about the text you brought is that I think this is a common problem for all of us who have to look at a set prayer or a set prayer book or a set liturgy and say, I don't feel that today. I don't feel Ha'el Hagibor Vehano. I don't feel God who's so, exalted and amazing and awesome. If that's truly who God is, God's not doing that for me this week. And so really, you want me to say these words and I don't feel them? What does that mean? I only pray what I feel? Does it mean I only say the Shema when I feel it? And the tension of that between the set matbea, which we talk about a lot in our community, the matbea, kind of like the set stuff, and the kavanah, like the prayer from the heart. And when they conflict, what do you do? So I just really appreciate that you brought this forward. And I think Bert.
I just had a question. These descriptive terms are not really saying all-powerful in that God controls absolutely everything. They're just saying that God is powerful and mighty. And that whole issue that you raised before of, why do bad things happen to good people? I've heard some rabbis argue that really is more of a Greek and Middle Age vision, and that back in these days, God wasn't regarded as controlling absolutely everything. After all, in Egypt, not only were the Jews enslaved, but supposedly God forgot them and didn't hear their cries, and later heard them.
Yeah, I think the notion of God develops. Excuse me, let me take another drink. You could see its development in the Bible itself. The God at the beginning and the God later doesn't seem to be necessarily the same, at least if you're not coming from a completely traditional point of view. But I think the problem begins when you basically say there's one God. When you go to monotheism, then you can no longer say, well, the drought's because the rain god's mad, and it may not be completely like as you said, like in a sense, in the story of Egypt, right? There's you feel there's a sense God's fighting with the Egyptian gods to prove he's the stronger God, right? So you still have some sense that there's other gods, but I think as it goes on, it becomes there is only the God of Israel, who is the God of the world, right? Not just of the Jewish people or of the land of Israel. And then you get to the problem of, and its biggest problem is when bad things happen to good people. Here I was talking more broadly of the fate of the Jewish people. But again, even in the Talmud, they're struggling with this issue. I think there are two classic answers. One is there's a reason for these things. We just don't understand it. God knows, but we can't understand. We can't explain why these terrible things happen. And then there's another, that's the most common, and I think that's the one that still people would say today. Another one in the Talmud, it talks about this concept that God causes the ones God loves to suffer. Yisurim shel ahava, right? So the saintly, you can be very saintly, but you can have a terrible life. There's one of the rabbis of the Talmud says, you know what, God, I'll skip on the suffering from love. Give it to somebody else. I don't need this token of your affection, right? So there is that rejection, already of that. Yeah, we don't like that answer, But I think that's there. And I was talking most in the sense that this becomes, particularly later than this text, but in the Middle Ages, religious polemics are very much around, well, you guys are losers. So some of you may have heard or been taught about the Khazars. Kuzari is a book about this. There was a kingdom, sort of off towards, Ukraine and farther over someplace, where the king converted to Judaism in the middle. And apparently this happened. This is actually true. And so the Jews were very excited because they could say, well, we're subservient here in Europe, but over there's a Jewish king, and there are Jews in power, right? So that's the polemic is over power. Like, you're powerless, like you're obviously losers, right? So they were very excited about that. But the same kind of polemic was going on between Christians and Muslims. So when Muslims were kind of, conquering lots of places, they would say, well, obviously we're God's, chosen. And then when the Christians push back, then, the Crusades, God's fighting on our side. Let's get Jerusalem. That becomes, so that was that was a piece of this. But I want to go to the last part, which I think, at least how I want to read it, changes this. So if it ended there, that's, I think, would be the understanding of the text, right? And the men of the Great Assembly did a great thing. But then the third line from the bottom, how could the prophets, and the text actually says the rabbis, they imagined Jeremiah and Daniel were actually like rabbis, just like they imagined that Abraham was observant and probably like a rabbi. They knew they were prophets, but they thought they were prophets and rabbis. How could the prophets overturn a ruling by Moses, right? So Moses, hears the Torah directly from God. And how could Jeremiah and Daniel say, I don't care the fact that Moses said you should say God, the great, the mighty, and the awesome. I'm going to leave out, one of these words. So that they're asked, the Talmud is asking the question, okay, we get what the men of the Great Assembly did, but what were Jeremiah and Daniel doing? How could they have done that? And the last line is very interesting, I think. Rabbi Elazar said, because they know that God is truth, that the essence of God is truth. Therefore, they could not ascribe false attributes to God. They couldn't say something that was false. And that's how the text ends. To me, it's very interesting and I think telling that Jeremiah and Daniel get the last word in the text. And there are other rabbinic texts where they express questions or doubts. Sometimes they put it into other people's, maybe it's a non-Jew who asks the question. I think scholars have a sense that sometimes they have the questions that anybody that's thinking about this struggles with, right? Just as I said, they struggled with why do they saw in their own lives that there were people who were righteous and pious who suffered. There was one person, one rabbi, scholar in the Talmud, who says he had 10 children, all of whom died in childbirth. Died young, right? So it's a completely tragic life. So they knew the reality, and in that sense, I think they're in getting Jeremiah and Daniel to ask the question that is bothering them. And it's, I think it's powerful that who gets the last word, as in many conversations. I think it's striking that they put this part last. They could have put it before they praise the men of the Great Assembly. And related to what Rabbi Amy was saying, I learned this, the first time I learned this text, I was in my freshman year, it was many years ago. I attended Yeshiva University in New York to kind of continue my Jewish studies. I was there for a year and then transferred. I was unhappy there. But I was, and we, the main thing we did was we had a class in Talmud, and one of the teachers, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, was teaching the class, and I think like once a month he would say, it was 5 days a week, so once a month he would say, I'm going to give a talk about something else. And he taught this text. That was the first time I'd ever heard this text. And he then said, he was thinking about this text because he was thinking of Elie Wiesel. This was in 1967-68. It was just when Elie Wiesel was becoming very well known. He'd just begun giving a series of lectures at the 92nd Street Y. His book Night had come out a few years before, and some of his other work. And Rabbi Lichtenstein saw this text from as a dialogue with Elie Wiesel. And if, for those of you who read Night, might remember there's a very powerful episode in Night, which is, Wiesel's own story of being in the camp. And there's, the Nazis are executing a number of the hanging of a few of the Jews in the camp because they were, I think they were trying to gather arms or something. Wiesel, I won't go into details, it's so horrible, but the scene he's describing, and all the prisoners in the camp have to watch the execution take place by hanging. And someone behind, they're all standing in rows, and someone behind Wiesel says, where is God? Where is God? And I think, now I'm telling this, I think it's God, someone, maybe it was Wiesel, said, he's on the gallows, right? More broadly, Wiesel challenges traditional notions of God and belief coming out of his own experience and the experience of so many others during the Holocaust. Interestingly enough, Rabbi Lichtenstein heard Wiesel's words and thought this text echoed them. I think correctly thought as that's why I was struck with what Amy said. It's the same kind of question. I mean, obviously, Wiesel's experience in that moment was horrible to the extreme. Lichtenstein, who was completely Orthodox rabbi, very well-known Orthodox rabbi, said he sympathized with Wiesel's position and Wiesel's struggle, but he said in the end, the men of the Great Assembly restored the words to the liturgy, or in the end they kept their belief in God, and that's what we need to do. And it was only some years later, thinking about the text, that I said, well, I don't know. I think I'm reading the text as I just shared with you, is that Jeremiah and Daniel get the last word. And if you read the text with that emphasis, then I think it's saying that you need to speak from the truth of your own experience. That truth is also truth. And it's, it's not simple, and it's not, just speak always from your own experience. But I think that's, we talked some about truth at the last session. I think this is a different aspect. This is about what is the truth that you're experiencing, and it could be that I think, as Rabbi Amy, I think you suggested this, that it could be that truth is the truth of now, and it could be next week or months from now. The truth might be different, right? I could be going through a really difficult time now, and so that it's a moment of truth, and I'm not gonna. I don't know about the great and mighty, or I'm not going to say, let's all sing out joyously to God when I'm not feeling joyous, right? So let me stop there and open it for people's comments.
So I want to start by saying thank you for bringing this teaching, Rabbi Strassfeld, and I was struck when you were talking about we're losers. Like, I'm so struck by the way that cripples Jews by saying we're losers. They killed us all. They murdered us all. They still want to murder us all. Like, we're losers. Like how that leads to this Jewish position of defensiveness and rush to anger and rush to being offended because we're the losers in history. And we have been over and over and over and over. And I call this PTSD Judaism. Like, I see it around support of Israel, where people are not thinking, they're actually just reacting to PTSD circumstances. And so we support Israel no matter what and no matter how, and we have to stand against any kind of expression. And they go crazy, like, quickly about we're the losers in history. And that means they're always out to get us, and we always have to be defensive. And in the same way, it's the Arab understanding, like, right, of colonialism, and they've been defeated and they've been humiliated and they've had everything from their culture taken from them, which so much of our texts that you've quoted, Talmud and whatever, are Aramaic. They're actually, right, set in the model of Babylonia and the model of the Arab world. And they too have been humiliated by defeat after defeat after defeat of colonialism. And how the text you just brought, it just came to me all of a sudden. It's like, that's exactly why we have so much tension around anything in the Middle East and even in America about, Jewish responses to stuff in the Middle East, because everyone's coming from this place of we're the losers. And right, and then fill in the blank, and there's no rational thinking past we're the losers and that means X, Y, Z. And at a fundamentalist, kind of commitment level. So I just want to put that out there. That was a huge insight that just came to me as you taught this text.
Yeah, nice. Other comments? There's one thing as you're thinking about it. There's one thing I think that could be an important factor in these things. Jeremiah experienced the destruction of the temple. The men of the Great Assembly lived, a couple centuries later, right? So is it different when it's your personal experience, right? Elie Wiesel was in a camp, he saw those things. This isn't He's just telling a story that other, and part of the, what you just said, Amy, is like, for people who've lost someone and we're talking about the Israeli-Arab conflict, who've lost someone in war, or even worse, who lost someone in a terrorist attack. It's not easy to say, well, we should make peace, right? But so I think there's something to that, and it also, that's also that sense, that maybe there can be healing when time has passed, when the wounds aren't so fresh, and when both societies have been living for a while with this, and as everybody says, you don't make peace with your friends; you make peace with your enemies.
Right. And if both people can get to a place where it's like we actually have suffered the same thing, and which no one wants to say about their enemy, like we've suffered the same thing, right? What you're lifting up is that abandonment of like the ha'el hanorah, like the ve'hagadol, like the big, amazing presence that would save us from all of this didn't show up. It didn't show up. The presence that showed up at the sea did not show up at the Holocaust, and did not show up at the destruction of the Second Temple. And for the Arabs, did not show up when colonial forces came in and decimated their empire. And when the God that you believe in and pray to so hard doesn't show up, what do you do with that? And then when it becomes anger and hatred because we've been betrayed maybe by our own God, like that's intense. That's intense, which I feel is under some of this. You can't tell me Jews who are coming out of PTSD Judaism, you can't tell me they don't look at God and go, seriously, you're a sick parent, right? That you love me, you treasure me, and yet you allow me to be tortured and abused over and over and over again. How am I supposed to relate to that? Like with any kind of understanding that I'm worthy of love and respect and dignity and health and safety.
So I see two hands, Judith, and is it Dana or Dana?
Dana. I'm Judith.
Dana.
Yeah, so Judith and Dana.
The question I had is, are you familiar with the writings of Mark Twain about the Jews?
Yes.
I think that is the opposite of we are losers. And for anybody who hasn't read it, I suggest you Google it and read it, because I think it's really amazing that he wrote what he wrote when he wrote it, about for such a small percentage of the world's population. Look at what we've accomplished. It's not the loser mentality at all. Do you have any comments about Mark Twain's ideas?
Well, you're right. He takes it's the same facts, in that sense. He says, how do these people survive all this time? It must be that God really likes them, right? I haven't read the essay in decades, but it's, and it's very Mark Twain charming and a little bit funny.
Yes.
But right. So you get, it's this philo-Semitic, and usually we're much more familiar with anti-Semitic, and
right,
and because Twain's like sort of cool guy, whatever. So yeah.
From Middle America, where that's not popular.
Yeah, it's right, right, and I'm sure people have written about. I don't know what his contacts were, particularly with Jews or anything, but
well, he knew Shalom Aleichem for one thing. And he said he was the Shalom Aleichem of America.
That's right.
And Shalom Aleichem said that he was the Mark Twain of Brooklyn.
Very cute. Right. So, but that's the look. Many people went through many Jews went through the experience of the of the Shoah and the camps. Some people came out of that saying, I'm never going to believe in God again. I can't believe, I'm done. It's over completely, and they were religious before, not people who, and then there were some people who discovered God, because how did I survive if God didn't want me to? I saw all those other people, right? So, part of it is, and that's one of the larger challenges of truth, not even in extreme situations, is people have
experience.
They take kind of the same experience, but they're not the same person. You and I aren't the same people. So, we don't have the same history, but even if we grew up together, even if we were twins, we wouldn't necessarily have the same response, right? So my truth is, I can't say that. Your truth is, someone's truth is, you can, right? So, and I think that's part of the challenge, to understand, and it's complicated because there's some things that are just not true, right? The Holocaust happened. Like the opinion that it didn't happen is not like your truth. It's false, right? But
it's
there's
not
a lot,
an alternate fact,
right? But there's a lot that's eliminating that. There's a lot where people just have different responses and different experiences and different senses of, what's the way forward, Wait, so who is Dana?
Dana? I think Dana
was.
It's
I know it's getting a little late here, so I just appreciate Rabbi Amy's comment about the tension, because it's like a theme even with your earlier class. Who can convert to Judaism? What words are right in the prayer? What is God and the truth? And I have this thought that the tension is always there in whatever era we're living in. Kind of that tension never goes away, whether you're living in the times of the rabbis or you're living now. And, we have to make sense of it, but it's not like we're always losers, but we're always feeling the tension. We feel the tension at the wedding when we crush the glass, and so I wanted to note that. I wondered if that tension is part of how we see ourselves.
Well, I also think, I hadn't thought of it that way, but I'm reading the text the way I want it. Obviously, my teacher read it the other way. But what's great about the text is that it's there. The tension is there. Both those voices are kept in the text. If it ended without that, the response of Jeremiah and Daniel, it would have said whatever. But now it's, I can read it. They get the last word. Rabbi Lichtenstein read it. We hear that voice and we say, we're sorry. We still have to follow the rules, right? There's a greater truth, and that's the tension, right? And to understand it's never simple, and
nothing is.
And how do you live with that? And, without just, without saying, well, okay, everything's true. No, or nothing is true, or, we can't talk to each other because you have your truth and I have my truth. And somewhat it's recognizing that your truth could be true and my truth could be true, even though they're opposite truths, right? And as I'm leaving aside things that are just false, that's. Did I see another hand?
Yeah, if I may interject,
sure.
I think this whole discussion is addressed by what Mordecai Kaplan said when he introduced Reconstructionist Judaism, that there's no supernatural God, that God does not interfere in human affairs, that God doesn't make winners and losers. And I think I find that more intellectually satisfying than all these other approaches. Your comments?
Yeah, no, right. I mean, that's, theologically, I think you're right. Kaplan's, in the end, Kaplan didn't like any of the traditional answers about, how bad, why do bad things happen, and Harold Kushner, who was a student of Mordecai Kaplan, wrote, when, not why, but when bad things happen to good people. And, he basically said, I'd rather believe in a God that's good and doesn't act in the world than believe in a God that acts in the world who I think does bad things. If that's my choice, and he thought it's a choice. He saw that as a choice. I think one can easily make that argument. And that's what, and he wrote that very well in a book that made it accessible, which you couldn't always say about Kaplan's writings. It's heresy. But yes, and therefore, ultimately, just as I did with the last text, I want to read this not so much about God and prayer and liturgy, but it's really about, again, it's like the truth, right? And what's the truth, and thank God that we're not going to be in concentration camps and that experience, but we all experience loss. We all, and that's why I was saying that the way I understand the halacha, that is that between the time that a loved one dies and the funeral, you're basically free from the traditional commandments like praying. And some people think it's because you're supposed to just focus on the details of the funeral, or that like my mind's, well, I'm really gonna to say Ha'el Hagadol Gibor V'Norah, and then all these other prayers, when like my mind's just not there. I'm not thinking about that stuff. But I think it's actually because it's you can't say, or I don't want to say you can't. I think many people find it very hard to say God is great and marvelous and wonderful when there's an expression in the Talmud, make mutal lefanov, when the corpse is right in front of you, and that the burial hasn't taken place, right? So it's very fresh, and to say all those affirmations about God, I think that's the time that you can't. And the tradition wisely says, we're not going to try and ask you that. And it's like the one place, like even the ultra Orthodox people don't say, well, I'm going to be machmir, I'm going to be really frum, and I'm going to daven anyways, even though my father or mother just died. Like nobody does that, and I think I don't think they're thinking this, but I just think it's an unreasonable request.
And so I want to say, Michael, how freeing that is, that we can say that as Reconstructionist Jews. And by the way, Rabbi Strassfeld is a Reconstructionist Jew. That we can say that as Reconstructionist Jews with all confidence and all of our beliefs intact about what we believe about the world. That at this moment, I refuse to say Ha'el HaNorah, HaGadol. Like I refuse to say God is awesome and wonderful and terrific. And we also stand at Kaddish, and say, blessed is the source of life, essentially. And so the ones who want to say the corpse is in front of me, how could I possibly be asked to daven, are also saying, right, Yitadar, V'Yitalev, V'Yitalal, God's blessed name should be lifted and exalted and whatever. But I love that we as Reconstructionists can say, because both are true at the same time. We are not going to stand up and say, praise be whatever, because I can't right now. And we are still going to say Kaddish, which, Lisa and her mom, you see Lisa and mom down there in the corner of the screen. They're doing that now during Shiva. They're going to stand and say Kaddish tonight at Shiva tonight. And it's going to say Ha'el Gadol V'Norah, this stuff that we've been talking about. We say, no, we don't say that because whatever, but we do in Kaddish. And I think that's an inherent tension in progressive Judaism, which I appreciate, which is, we're going to ask we're going to be asked at this really difficult, horrible moment to stand and affirm the blessing of life and the mystery at the source of that and the fountain of love, that is that, and hold that there isn't a supernatural God who we can thank or blame for things that happen in our lives.
So we should be ending. Let me just say one last thing about the text. I discovered something recently about the text which I never thought before, which is there are three, descriptions of God. One that is Gadol, great, which nobody takes that away. Now you could say because they couldn't find a verse that didn't had the other two without the Gadol. But that's like the too practical, like let's be a little mystical here, right? And then it struck me, isn't it interesting that the one name that God still has is Gadol? And what's the name that is given to the men of the assembly? They could have been called the smart men of the assembly, the interesting, the wise men of the assembly. They're called the men of the great assembly, the Gadol. They share that name, that attribution. And I think that I want to understand that, and picking up what Rabbi Amy just said, it's like we live with the contradictions, right? We hold both those things. And sometimes we say, I'm only going to hold one, and that's the way I was interpreting that, that the time right after a death, right? There's like, you don't have to try, we'll make it easier kind of thing. But basically try I'll hold both things. And I would argue that's what makes us Gadol, the potential for human beings to hold, irreconcilable differences at the same time, sometimes less, sometimes more, and live with that and try to make the world better. And in that sense, we are in the image of God, who is great. And, again, using Kaplan, you see God acting in the world through people acting in the world. And when we're kind and caring, and when we make a Shiva minyan, and when we hold each other's hands when we can again, in comfort, that is, we have that potential. And so that's the real answer. I think I overemphasized the loser thing because everybody was picking up. The real answer is we're not losers. We're Gadol. And that it can't be taken away, right? That attribute can't be, that potential is always there. It's not always realized. We're obviously, too many times we're not the best person, the best Michael that I could be. But we are created in the image of God, and I think part of that means is that potential to be great and to have a powerful impact on our world. And that can't be taken away by anybody. And that's not about history. It is the essence of who we are. And that's, so Gadol, we all remain.
Amen. Have you got any guna for us to take us out?
Is there time for that, or
do we have? Yeah,
huh?
we're at 5:30, so
I'm fine. But I'm respectful of everybody's. We'll see without the words, without So there's a melody that I'm sure some of you know about. The world is a narrow bridge, but don't be afraid, right? Because
don't let fear be everything.
Huh?
Don't fear be everything was Nachman's original quote. Was It's not lo lefached klal. It's that you shouldn't allow fear to be everything that it should.
Right. Don't be, yeah.
Only thing. And
just remember you're gadol. That's all. That's all you have to do.
כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, ועיקר לא לפחד כלל. The world is a scary, scary place. And our work is to not let fear define everything for us. We do that together. We do that in the shadow of teachers from generations past. We do that sitting in the grace of the teachers who choose to show up now, like Rabbi Michael Strassfeld. We do that most of all as a kahal, as a community who refuse to give over to isolationism and to fear and to egotism and to individualism, that we choose over and over and over again as a community not to let fear, not to let being alone define who we are. We come together. And that gives us the strength to be gadol, the biggest gadol, the biggest big of anything. I trust all of you to do that and to keep doing that. I thank Rabbi Michael Strassfeld for showing up to be a teacher among us, so we get to hear different styles and different kinds of voices and different ways of learning and leaning into Torah, into the wisdom of our tradition.